The verdict hadn't even been read, but the celebration had already begun. Laughter rippled through the courtroom like a slow leak of poison. Quiet at first, then shameless. Hands clapped shoulders. Phones buzzed with pre-written headlines. Somewhere near the gallery, a badge glinted under the fluorescence like a middle finger to justice. Officer Travis Boone adjusted his collar, leaned over to his partner Mark Dillard, and whispered something behind his palm. Dillard smirked, the kind that doesn't need translation. It was victory. Undeserved. Unpunished. Unapologetic. At the prosecutor's table, D.A. Henry Carlisle closed his briefcase with a soft click, like a man confident that no one would ever open it again. His tone all morning had been smug but mechanical. He hadn't argued for truth. He'd performed inevitability. And judging by the faces of the jury, pale, tired, compliant, it had worked. In the front row, two mothers wept, one from rage, the other from relief. It was hard to tell which was which. And at the defense table, Elena Brooks sat still. Wrist shackled, orange jumpsuit, shoulders square. Eyes forward. She didn't blink, didn't beg, didn't flinch. To most in the room, she was already buried. Just another black woman caught red-handed, filed away under a case number and a slanted headline. No one saw her as anything more than a statistic wrapped in shame. But she knew something none of them did. The grave they dug wasn't hers. It was theirs. Judge Ellen Whitford lifted her gavel slowly, her expression unreadable. The kind of tired that only comes from decades of watching hope lose. She cleared her throat, about to formalize the lie, stamp the injustice, shut the door on what could have been the truth. But then, a voice sliced through the courtroom. Not loud, not emotional, just clean. Precise, measured. Your Honor, before the court proceeds, I have newly obtained federal evidence that directly challenges the foundation of this case. The room froze. So did the gavel, mid-air. All eyes turned, some in confusion, others in dread, toward the speaker. Rachel Monroe had risen from her seat like a fuse quietly lit. The young public defender stood tall, holding a thick, sealed folder marked with a federal insignia. The courtroom didn't breathe. Carlisle's voice cracked through the tension. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Whitford's gavel slammed down once, sharply. Bring it forward. Rachel walked with deliberate calm, heels clicking on marble like a countdown. She placed the folder on the judge's desk and stepped back. Judge Whitford opened it. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment the power shifted. It was subtle, but undeniable. The air in the room changed. The silence wasn't peace. It was the edge of a storm. No one knew it yet, but this case had just detonated. The battle they thought was over. It was only just beginning. The cuffs were too tight, deliberately so. They weren't just meant to restrain. They were meant to punish. The cold steel bit into Elena Brooks's wrists like teeth, grinding against bone every time the patrol car hit a bump in the road. Blood wasn't drawn, not yet, but the message was clear. You don't belong. And you don't leave here the same. She sat in the back seat, her body stiff against the plastic shell of the cruiser, trying not to wince. The interior reeked of sweat, stale fries, and old power. In the front seat, officers Travis Boone and Mark Dillard laughed without shame, the kind of laughter that belonged in locker rooms in frat houses, not law enforcement. Boone checked the rearview mirror, caught Elena's gaze, and smirked. She walked right into it, he said, loud enough for her to hear. Didn't even blink. Dillard chuckled. Text the captain. Another big win for Clayton County. They were euphoric. Not because they'd stopped a crime, but because they thought they'd caught a stereotype. A lone black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong kind of face. They didn't see Elena. They saw a target, a pawn. A tool to boost stats and brag about at the bar later. But Elena didn't give them what they wanted. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She didn't even speak. Her breathing was calm. Her jaw tight. Her eyes locked on the window, watching the city blur by, as if cataloging the route, memorizing the lights, timing the distance between stations. To them, she looked quiet because she was afraid. But they had no idea who she was, or what she was doing in that car. When the cruiser jerked to a stop outside the police station, Boone practically bounced out of the driver's seat. He yanked open the back door, grabbing Elena by the arm like a prize. "All right, superstar," he sneered, hauling her upright. "Let's show you off." She stepped out with grace, back straight, chin high, in. She didn't resist. She didn't stumble. She walked like a woman who knew this corridor. Not because she belonged in it, but because she'd studied every inch of it from the other side. Inside, the station buzzed with noise, radios squawking, phones ringing, boots scraping across worn tile. The overhead lights cast a sickly glow on beige walls and old posters. The air was thick with burnt coffee and the ghosts of 1,000 accusations. A few officers glanced up. One chuckled. Another raised an eyebrow. One younger cop, barely out of academy age, furrowed his brow when he saw her. Boone leaned into him with a smirk. "We got her at Jackson State, right in the middle of campus, a bag full of blow." "Real shame. She looked smart." The young officer looked uneasy. "Was there anyone else around?" Dillard cut in fast. "Nope, just her. Case closed." The rookie hesitated, then nodded slowly. But something lingered in his eyes. Not conviction, but doubt. Elena saw it. Just for a second. A crack in the facade. "Good," she thought. Boone shoved her forward again. "Come on, let's get this show over with. Got beers waiting." The woman behind the booking desk didn't look up right away. Mid-50s, glasses perched on the edge of her nose. She reached for a form, her voice flat. "Name? Brooks, Elena," Boone answered before Elena could speak. "Drug possession." "Intent to distribute. Caught red-handed. You know the drill." He said it loud enough for half the room to hear. The words weren't just facts. They were branding. A public label slapped on before she could open her mouth. The booking officer sighed and pushed her clipboard forward. "Prints." Elena placed her cuffed hands on the scanner. The machine beeped, cold and indifferent, as it captured her identity. Not who she was, but who they wanted her to be. Another officer walked by, pausing as he caught sight of her. "Damn shame," he muttered. "She looks like she had a future." Boone laughed. "Yeah." "Used to." Elena said nothing. Not yet. They moved her through processing like a product on an assembly line. Mugshot, pat down, intake. Every step was designed to degrade. The pat down lingered too long, the questions came too fast, and the tone was always condescending. She could feel it, the way they looked at her, as if trying to guess what kind of broken home she came from, what mistake had landed her here. But Elena had been trained to endure worse. The holding cell was small, metallic, and smelled like sweat-soaked walls. Boone slammed the door behind her with flair. "Get comfy!" he barked. The steel echoed like a drumbeat. Elena stepped inside, turned, and sat down gently on the bench. The chains around her wrists rattled as she leaned back against the wall. She closed her eyes, inhaled, exhaled. The sting of the cuffs, the smell of power gone rancid, the laughter still bouncing in her ears. She let it wash over her, then recede like a tide. She wasn't here by accident. She wasn't here because they'd outsmarted her. She was here because they were predictable. Every laugh, every insult, every careless step they took, she'd seen it before. And she'd be ready when it mattered. They thought this was her fall, but it was only the setup. And the game was about to begin. The station door slammed behind her with a metallic thud, final, echoing, institutional. Elena Brooks didn't flinch. The fluorescent lights above buzzed like angry insects, casting a cold white glow over cracked linoleum and yellowing walls. The place smelled like sweat, ink, and something deeper, guilt that had soaked into every brick. The guilt of 1,000 cover-ups. Of justice delayed, of names erased. Travis Boone walked beside her like he owned the building. Mark Dillard followed just behind, hands on his belt, his smirk still stapled to his face. The two men moved like cowboys returning from a hunt, satisfied, triumphant, certain the creature they'd dragged in wouldn't make a sound. Elena kept pace with them. Silent, eyes forward. Every step she took was catalogued. The layout of the station, the badge numbers on the wall, the flickers of reaction from the people she passed. It wasn't the first time she'd been inside a place like this, but it was the first time they thought she belonged in a cage. As they walked past the bullpen, conversations tapered off. A few officers looked up from their desks. Others leaned back in their chairs, assessing her like vultures watching a wounded animal limp through the desert. But one of them, a younger man, early 20s, buzzed hair, fresh academy shine, frowned. Officer Daniel Ruiz. He didn't look at Elena the way the others did. He looked at her like something didn't make sense. "Who is she?" he asked Boone quietly. Boone grinned. Jackson State, bag full of coke. "All hers. Textbook grab." Ruiz squinted. "Was she alone?" "Yeah," Dillard chimed in. "No witnesses. Just her dumb enough to act like she wasn't being watched." Ruiz hesitated. Just a second. Not long enough to stop anything, but long enough for Elena to notice. That crack. That tiny sliver of doubt. Good. They turned the corner into intake. The room was no more than a box. Gray walls, metal furniture, and that all-too-familiar one-way glass. There was no clock, because time here wasn't meant to be kept. It was meant to be forgotten. The booking officer, an older black woman with weary eyes and glasses smudged from hours of disuse, didn't even glance up when Boone shoved Elena forward. "Name?" she muttered. "Elena Brooks," Boone answered for her again. "Possession with intent. Caught red-handed." "She doesn't talk?" the woman asked. Boone snorted. "Not yet." Elena stared at him, silent, her wrists still bound in front of her. The woman behind the desk slid over a form, still not looking up. "Prince." Boone tugged Elena toward the scanner and unlatched one side of the cuff, holding the other tight like she might bolt, as if she hadn't just walked through the whole station like a stone statue. Her fingers touched the cold glass. Beep! The machine hummed as it captured her prints. Another identity locked into the system. Another number. To them, she was becoming what they needed her to be. Another defendant. Another lesson. Another trophy. As her prints finalized, a second officer passed through the room. White, mid-30s, lazy eyes, and twitchy fingers. He glanced at Elena and scoffed. "Looks like she had potential," he muttered. Boone laughed. "Not anymore." The woman behind the desk stamped the form with a dull thunk. "Next." Dillard grabbed Elena's arm again, tighter this time. He was getting more comfortable. Too comfortable. He led her toward the camera setup, motioned for her to stand still. "Smile," he sneered. The flash lit up the room. A second later, her mugshot blinked onto the screen. Case number, full name. Date, the usual, except none of it was true. They thought they were documenting a criminal, but they were documenting the beginning of their own exposure. Dillard led her out of intake toward holding. The hallway narrowed, quieter here, more intimate. He leaned in as they walked. "You don't say much." Elena didn't answer. He chuckled. "That'll change. Give it a few hours. That silence?" "It breaks." Still nothing. He shoved open a heavy door at the end of the hall, revealing a concrete cell. No windows, one bench, one toilet, one flickering light. "Home sweet home," he said, unhooking her remaining cuff and pushing her inside. The door slammed. The lock clicked, and for the first time, Elena was alone. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just stood there, watching the door. The concrete walls held echoes, the ghosts of women before her, some broken, some silent forever. But Elena wasn't here to join them. She wasn't here to vanish. She stepped to the center of the room, slowly sat on the steel bench, and leaned back. The light buzzed above, casting harsh shadows across her face. She exhaled. Then, like muscle memory, her fingers began to tap. Just 3 slow taps on the bench. Then a pause. Then 3 more, a rhythm, a code. A pattern she'd used in places far worse than this, in war zones, in interrogation chambers, in halls of power filled with men who thought they'd never be caught. The tap wasn't just habit, it was the signal, to herself, that this was when the real game began. They thought they'd captured her, but Elena Brooks was only now stepping into the arena, and this time, she was playing to win. The sound of footsteps broke the silence, measured, heavy. Confident, the kind of walk that doesn't ask for permission, the kind of walk that believes it owns whatever it's about to enter. Elena Brooks didn't look up right away. She was still seated on the bench in her holding cell, her back against the cold wall, her fingers resting in her lap like she'd just been meditating, not processed like a felon. The overhead light buzzed, flickering in a steady rhythm, like a countdown to something no one could stop. The door creaked open. Officer Travis Boone stepped inside, a manila folder tucked under one arm, the other hand resting casually near his holster. He didn't speak at first, just stood there looking at her like he was trying to read something that refused to be written. She finally raised her eyes, calm, focused, unblinking. Boone's smirk curled like smoke. "You know," he began, stepping closer, "most people in your position are already crying. Or begging." Elena said nothing. He sighed theatrically, then opened the folder, flipping it around so she could see the papers. Blurred photocopies of fingerprints, surveillance stills, typed witness statements. "Here's what we've got," he said, tapping the top page. "Fingerprints on the bag, surveillance footage. One witness says you were acting nervous." He let the words hang like bait. "It's open and shut," he added, "but I'm not a cruel man." He closed the folder with a soft snap, then leaned against the bars, lowering his voice like he was about to do her a favor. "You plead guilty. We push for 5 years. With good behavior, you're out in 3. You can rebuild, fade away." "Whatever." Still, Elena didn't speak. Boone tilted his head. "That's not bad, you know. For someone in your situation." Her voice, when it came, was low but exact, like a scalpel slipping beneath skin. "Is this the part where I thank you?" Boone's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm just trying to help you avoid the hard way." "And what's the hard way?" He straightened. Trial, jury, headlines. 10, maybe 15 years. That's if the judge is in a good mood. And spoiler alert, she won't be. Elena's lips twitched, barely. Sounds like you've rehearsed this. Boone blinked. You've done this before, she continued. Run the same lines. Same pressure, same timeline. Get them scared. Get them to sign. Wrap it up before anyone starts asking questions. He stepped forward, irritation flickering beneath the surface. You're playing a dangerous game. Elena finally smiled, slow, deliberate, sharp. I'm not playing, she said. You are. Boone's jaw tightened. I think, she added, leaning forward just enough to lower her voice to a whisper, you're scared I won't fold. Scared I'll take this to court. Scared someone might actually listen. He snapped the folder shut again, harder this time. Suit yourself, he muttered, stepping back. Enjoy rotting in here. The door slammed shut behind him. Elena leaned back into the wall, her breath steady, one offer down. The real fight hadn't even started yet. The knock was soft, hesitant. Then the door clicked open. Rachel Monroe stepped into the holding cell with a folder clutched to her chest like armor. She was young, not naive, but not yet hardened. Her suit was slightly rumpled, her dark curls pulled back in a way that said she'd dressed in a hurry. Beneath the professional facade was the energy of someone overworked, underpaid, and still clinging to the belief that the system could be fixed if people just tried hard enough. She took one look at Elena Brooks and tried to mask her surprise. It wasn't the orange jumpsuit that caught her off guard. It was Elena's eyes, calm, calculating, not broken, not even close. Ms. Brooks, Rachel began, setting the file on the bench between them. I'm your court-appointed public defender, Rachel Monroe. Elena gave a polite nod but said nothing. Rachel cleared her throat, flipping the folder open. Okay, so, the state's offering a deal. 5 years, possession with intent, plead guilty, and you could be out in 3 with good behavior. Silence. Rachel glanced up. Honestly, it's not a bad offer. With the evidence they've got— Evidence? Elena interrupted, her voice soft but unmistakably firm. Or assumptions stacked on paper. Rachel blinked. They have your prints on the bag, a witness, security footage, and no motive. No prior record, no criminal history, no connection to the substance. No reason to be near that bag, except for the fact that I was there, and I'm me. Rachel hesitated, just long enough for Elena to see it. There's no angle where we win this in court, Rachel said finally. Not in this town. Not in this courtroom. Elena leaned in, not aggressive, just close enough that Rachel had to meet her eyes. I'm not asking you to believe me, she said. I'm asking you to look. Because if I plead guilty, they'll do it again, to the next woman, the next black girl who's alone. Who fits their story better than she fits her truth? Rachel's jaw tensed. I get it. I really do. But you need to understand what happens if this goes to trial. They'll eat you alive out there. The jury will see the orange jumpsuit before they see your face. I'm not scared of a courtroom, Elena said. But you are. Not because you're weak, because you still think the system listens. It doesn't. Not until someone breaks the script. Rachel looked away for a second, as if she were staring down a hallway she didn't want to walk through. She rubbed the bridge of her nose, then sat down slowly. This isn't how it works, she murmured. You don't just push back and win. Then why are you here? Elena asked. Rachel looked at her. Really looked at her. The posture, the control. The lack of panic. She wasn't dealing with someone who'd gotten caught. She was dealing with someone who was waiting. I've worked with clients who ran drugs, who confessed the second I walked in, who didn't even want a defense. Rachel paused. You're not them. "No," Elena said, "but the system doesn't care." "Unless someone forces it to." The room went still. Then Rachel stood up. "The folder is still open on the bench." "I'm not promising anything," she said, her voice quieter now, "but I'll look at the evidence. The reports, the footage. If there's something off, I'll find it." Elena nodded once. "That's all I ask." Rachel turned to leave, paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth," she said, "you're the first client I've had who didn't ask me what I could get for them." Elena gave her a thin, unwavering smile. "That's because I'm not here to get out." Rachel tilted her head. "Then what are you here for?" Elena's eyes sharpened. "To make sure the next woman doesn't have to be." Rachel left without another word. Elena sat alone once more. The cell hadn't changed. The cuffs still pressed red rings into her skin. The light still flickered above. But something was different now. The first domino had been touched. And in a machine built to break the innocent, that was all it took to begin its collapse. The second time he came, he didn't knock. The cell door opened hard and fast, like it had something to prove. Officer Travis Boone stepped inside with the same swagger he always wore, but there was something different about the way his eyes scanned the room this time. Less predatory, more calculating. He shut the door behind him. No clipboard, no backup, just him. And her. Elena Brooks sat exactly where he'd left her, on the bench, legs crossed at the ankle, hands folded neatly in her lap. Calm. Composed. Dangerous. Boone didn't speak right away. She didn't either. For 10 seconds they just stared at each other, two opponents sizing the distance between truth and exposure. "You've got balls," Boone finally said, cracking his knuckles. "I'll give you that." Elena said nothing, just tilted her head slightly, like she was listening for something behind his voice. He took a slow step forward. "You think this is some kind of game, that if you stay quiet long enough, you'll win some moral victory. But this isn't a movie. This is real. And out here, we write the rules." Still nothing from her. Just the faintest arch of one brow. Boone narrowed his eyes. "You keep pushing this. Are you going to the trial? You'll lose. You'll rot in a cell so small you'll forget your own name. That lawyer of yours, she won't save you. She's green. She'll fold under pressure." "Just like you will." Elena leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on her knees. "You talk too much," she said evenly. Boone froze. She stood, slow and deliberate, then stepped forward until they were only a few feet apart. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You're used to people being afraid of you. Used to barking and watching people flinch. You don't know what to do when someone just looks back." Boone's smirk twitched. His fingers flexed at his sides. Elena's eyes never left his. "You think you're in control. But I've seen your type before. Too eager, too clean. Too perfect. You hide your tracks like it's an art form, but it's not. It's a habit, and like all habits," she took a half step closer, her voice now just above a whisper, "you left a hole. People like you always do." Boone's jaw clenched. He didn't respond, didn't move. Because she was right, and both of them knew it. She didn't need to yell. She just needed to plant doubt. And that seed was already growing. Boone exhaled through his nose, sharply. "You think you're clever," he muttered. "But clever doesn't win against the system," Elena offered a faint smile. "No, but truth does." Eventually. He stared at her for one long moment, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard the frame shook. Elena sat down again, folding her hands once more. The cuffs were still tight. The light still flickered, but Boone's confidence had cracked, and the system. It had started to flinch. The courthouse hallway was colder than the holding cell. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath flickering fluorescent lights, each footstep echoing like a verdict not yet spoken. Elena Brooks walked in chains, wrists shackled, ankles cuffed, flanked by two officers who didn't bother hiding their pride. One of them smirked for the press camera waiting just outside the courtroom. The other adjusted her grip on Elena's arm like she was hauling garbage, not a human being. But Elena didn't look at them. She didn't look at the press or the crowd gathered along the corridor, whispering like vultures waiting for the first wound. She kept her eyes forward. Not out of fear, out of calculation. Inside the courtroom, the air shifted the moment she entered. Eyes turned, whispers silenced. Some saw a criminal. Some weren't sure anymore. Rachel Monroe, standing near the defense table, looked up and met Elena's gaze. Her expression had changed. Gone was the hesitation, the doubt. In its place was a kind of hard, sharpened resolve. The face of a woman who had seen enough to stop pretending the system just needed more effort. They sat down together. Shackles clinked as Elena took her place. Judge Ellen Whitford entered, robed and unreadable. A woman who had watched decades of cases blur together into a river of broken promises. But even she lingered a second longer than usual as she surveyed the room. The trial began. D.A. Henry Carlisle rose first, smug, polished, convinced of the inevitability of conviction. His opening statement was a performance, simple, methodical, seemingly airtight. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this is not a complicated case. The evidence is clear. The defendant was found in possession of a backpack containing a significant quantity of cocaine. Her fingerprints were found on the bag. A witness saw her behaving suspiciously, and surveillance footage supports the sequence of events. It's not about race, it's not about politics, it's about facts." He let that word sit like a verdict. Then he sat down. Rachel stood slowly. She straightened her blazer, breathed deeply, then faced the jury. "The prosecution wants you to believe this is simple," she began, "but simplicity doesn't equal truth, and when the truth is inconvenient, it gets buried." She walked toward the jury box. "My client has no criminal history, no ties to drug trafficking, no motive, no context, and no opportunity. She was arrested in broad daylight on a university campus during a public lecture. No bag in her possession, no direct eyewitness testimony. Just suspicion." A few jurors stirred. Rachel paused, then nodded toward Judge Whitford. "The defense calls Officer Travis Boone to the stand." Boone entered with a mask of neutrality. But it was stretched thin. He took the oath, sat upright, and folded his hands like he'd practiced this dozens of times, because he had. Carlisle nodded. "Officer, please walk the court through the events of the arrest." Boone kept it clinical. Anonymous tip. Suspicious behavior. "Bag found, Elena nearby, prints confirmed. No one else is in sight." Carlisle smiled. "No further questions." Rachel stood. She approached slowly. "Officer Boone," she said, "you mentioned an anonymous tip. Can you confirm who placed that call?" Boone paused. "It was untraceable, from a public payphone." "So to be clear," she said, "you don't know who made the call?" "No." "Thank you. Now let's discuss the backpack." "You stated that Ms. Brooks's fingerprints were found on it." "Yes." "Were there any other fingerprints?" A longer pause this time. Boone shifted. "I don't recall." Rachel picked up a folder and opened it. "I have the forensics report right here. It notes 5 distinct partial prints. Only one set was tested." Boone said nothing. Rachel raised her eyebrows. "Officer Boone, was the decision to test only Mrs. Brooks' prints your call?" Boone's jaw clenched. "We had enough to move forward. So you ignored the others?" "I followed protocol." She stepped closer. Whose protocol? The one that tells you to ignore exculpatory evidence if it gets in the way of an easy conviction. Carlyle rose. Objection, Judge Whitford raised a hand. Overruled. Officer, answer the question. Boone looked at the jury for the first time. They were no longer still. Some shifted. Some frowned. A few crossed their arms. Boone cleared his throat. We focused on the prints that matched the person at the scene. Rachel let the silence stretch. Then she turned to the jury. Focused. Not investigated, not questioned, not confirmed. Just focused. She paused. This isn't about evidence, it's about assumption. It's about a system that builds a story, then edits out everything that doesn't fit. She turned back to Boone. One last question, officer. In your years on the force, have you ever arrested someone who turned out to be innocent? Carlyle stood again. Objection, speculative. Judge Whitford's voice was cold. Sustained. But she didn't stop Boone from looking away. Rachel stepped back. No further questions. Boone left the stand in silence. The courtroom didn't cheer. It didn't shout. But the air had shifted, the doubt had arrived. And once it didn't leave. The defense table was quiet, too quiet. Elena Brooks sat motionless, her wrists still shackled in front of her, as the prosecution shuffled papers, trying to regroup. Officer Boone had left the stand, jaw tight, eyes hollow, a man who had just glimpsed the cliff edge beneath his feet. The jury was shifting now. Literally. One leaned forward, another tapped a pen against her notepad, gaze locked on Elena as if for the first time. They weren't convinced yet, but the spell had broken. Rachel Monroe stood slowly. No theatrics. No dramatic gestures. Just a calm breath, a straightened spine, and a quiet request that detonated like a grenade in the room. Your Honor, she said. The defense calls Elena Brooks to the stand. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Even Judge Whitford raised an eyebrow. Miss Monroe, she said carefully, is this part of your strategy? Rachel nodded once. It is now. The judge paused, studying her, then gave a slow nod. Proceed. The bailiff stepped forward, unlocked the shackles, and guided Elena to the witness box. The courtroom watched her move, tall, straight-backed, each step deliberate. No hesitation, no fear, only control. She sat, raised her right hand, and took the oath. Rachel approached with the air of someone holding the final card. Elena, she began, her voice steady. Were you in possession of the backpack containing drugs on the day of your arrest? No, Elena said, voice clear and crisp. I was not. Did you have any knowledge of the drugs found at the scene? No. Then tell the court, Rachel said, stepping aside slightly, who you are. Elena looked out across the courtroom. At the jury, the judge, the prosecution, the reporters leaning forward, pens hovering midair. My name is Elena Brooks, she said. I am the Director of Counterintelligence for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence collapsed like glass. Gasps, whispers, the gallery erupted in confusion. The prosecution table jolted into movement. Carlyle stood, mouth half open, face bloodless. Judge Whitford slammed her gavel once. Twice. Order, sit down. Elena remained still. Rachel didn't flinch. I've been operating undercover, Elena continued, as part of an internal federal investigation into corruption within the Clayton County Sheriff's Department. Another gasp. The chaos surged again. They've been accused, Elena said, of planting drugs on innocent individuals to meet internal arrest quotas, particularly targeting black and brown communities, vulnerable students, and low-income neighborhoods. My arrest was not an accident, it was bait. And they took it. Carlyle shot to his feet. This is outrageous. If she were undercover, she was, Rachel interrupted, pulling out a thick federal sealed folder. "And here's the evidence." She handed it to the judge. "This is a classified case file, now unsealed, that includes sworn affidavits, forensic inconsistencies, and internal reports contradicting the prosecution's entire narrative." Carlisle fumed. "You blindsided the court." Elena looked directly at him. "You were never the target, but you aligned yourself with the ones who were. You built your case on sand, and now the tide has come in." Rachel flipped open the folder. Inside are records of altered police reports, disappearing body cam footage, forensic analyses showing tampered fingerprint evidence, and a pattern of arrests that follow the same script. Elena Brooks wasn't the first. She was just the first to have the means to fight back. Judge Whitford read silently. Her face didn't move, but her eyes sharpened with every page turned. Rachel turned to the jury. "You weren't given the full truth. You were given a performance built on forged evidence and backed by silence." Elena leaned forward now, her voice steady but edged with fire. "I walked into this courtroom in chains so you could see what this system does to people who can't walk out." The room went still again. Tense, heavy, no longer just about one woman and one crime. This was bigger, deeper, institutional. Rachel stepped back. No further questions. Carlisle stood, then sat. Judge Whitford looked up, her voice low. "Defense may submit the file into evidence. Court will reconvene at noon to review." The jury sat in stunned silence. Elena returned to her seat. The prosecution had brought a case. Elena had brought a mirror, and now everyone was forced to look. The courtroom was no longer just a room. It had become a pressure chamber. Silence had weight. Breath was held like currency. Every person inside knew something irreversible had happened, but they didn't know yet how far it would go. Judge Ellen Whitford sat unmoving at the bench. The thick federal file opened in front of her like a wound in the middle of the table. The seal broken, the secrets exposed. She turned each page slowly, methodically, her eyes scanning lines of testimony, timestamps, altered documents, body cam gaps, and quiet signatures of cowardice that had allowed it all to happen. On the prosecution bench, District Attorney Carlisle sat frozen, colorless, mouth slightly open, hands folded too tightly to look natural. Next to him, officers Travis Boone and Mark Dillard exchanged a glance, but neither dared speak. Elena Brooks sat in the defendant's chair, still in orange, still quiet, still chained. But the power in the room no longer belonged to those who had put her there. It belonged to her. Finally, Judge Whitford closed the file with a firm thud. She folded her hands, took a breath, then spoke, low, clear, and without an ounce of theatrics. "This court has reviewed the newly submitted federal documents regarding the internal investigation into the Clayton County Sheriff's Department, as well as the role of the defendant in that investigation." Her eyes moved to the jury. "It is the opinion of this court that not only was Ms. Brooks wrongfully arrested, but that the charges brought against her were built on deliberately falsified evidence." A murmur swept the room, restrained but undeniable. "Therefore," she said, "the motion to dismiss all charges against Director Elena Brooks is granted." Rachel exhaled, loud enough to hear. Elena didn't blink. "And further," the judge continued, her voice sharpening, "this court has seen sufficient cause to authorize immediate action by federal officers present in this courtroom." She looked to the gallery. U.S. Marshals. 2 plainclothes officers rose in unison from the back row. They didn't hesitate. They moved forward, cutting through the frozen courtroom like blades through fog. Boone stood too fast. "You can't be serious." His words were cut off by the cold snap of steel as cuffs clamped around his wrists. Dillard backed away, palms up, but it didn't matter. The charges had flipped. The hunted had become the hunter. "You have the right to remain silent," one of the marshals began, his voice flat. Elena watched as Boone's face twisted, not in anger, but in disbelief. like he was waking from a dream where power could never be taken from him. Rachel turned to her client, or rather, her former client, and smiled. "We did it." Elena's reply was a whisper. "No." She looked at Boone, now surrounded, red-faced, and breathing heavily. "They did it to themselves." The marshals escorted both officers out of the courtroom as flashbulbs began to pop in rapid fire. Reporters scrambled from their seats. People who had been certain they were watching a conviction unfold were now witnessing a reckoning. Rachel stepped over and gently unfastened Elena's shackles. The last clink of chain rang out like a bell, signaling the end of something old and the start of something that could never be buried again. Elena stood, slowly, shoulders square, gaze steady. For the first time since the beginning, she was no longer in custody. But she had never been a prisoner. She had been the mirror, and now the whole room had seen their reflection. The courthouse doors opened like jaws unclenching after years of silence. Elena Brooks stepped into the light. It was blinding at first, sunlight cutting through the cloud cover as if the sky had been holding its breath the entire trial. She paused just long enough for the moment to settle, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but for herself. Behind her, chaos still rippled through the building. Stunned officers whispering, reporters scrambling, the heavy thud of badge-laden reputations collapsing under their own weight. Justice, when it finally lands, is never gentle. But out here, the world moved on like nothing had happened. Cars passed, phones buzzed. Somewhere down the block, a child laughed, unaware that less than 30 feet away, a system had just cracked. Elena walked down the courthouse steps slowly. No cuffs, no guards, no orange jumpsuit, just a simple gray suit someone from the bureau had brought her. Clean, unassuming, almost too quiet for what she'd just done. Rachel Monroe waited near the bottom step, holding a thick manila envelope, probably paperwork, probably more signatures. But her face said something else, something wordless, not victory, not a celebration. "Reckoning." Elena reached her, took the envelope. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. She turned back once. Just once. Looked up at the courthouse, stone and steel, proud columns built on principles people love to recite but rarely lived by. And she didn't smile. She remembered every second of being paraded in chains, every fingerprint scan, every staged photo, every lie sealed into official record. And now the records would tell a different story. Because this was never just about her, it was about all the people who didn't get their names cleared, who were buried beneath falsified reports, pressured plea deals, and judges who stopped listening a long time ago. She had power. That's what made this ending possible. But the real question hung in the air like smoke. What happens to the ones who don't? She looked at Rachel one more time, then spoke softly, but with the full weight of everything that had just happened. "They don't fear the law. They fear the ones who understand it." Then she walked away. Not as a defendant, not even as an FBI director, but as something rarer. Someone who went into the machine and came back with the gears in her hand. Because sometimes justice isn't given. It's taken. One trial at a time. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. If Elena Brooks hadn't had a title, a badge, and a federal file behind her, she'd be rotting in a prison cell right now. For every one Elena who escapes the machine, there are dozens more who don't. If this shook you, if it made you angry, made you think, made you see, don't scroll past. Subscribe to Injustice Unmasked. Comment with your thoughts, your stories, your outrage. Share this video, because the system doesn't break until we drag it into the light. Silence protects power. Truth exposes it. This is Injustice Unmasked, where the story doesn't end in the courtroom, it begins there.